My name was Frank Rodriguez, and if you're hearing this story, it means the truth has finally come to light. For 25 years, I lived by a simple belief. Honesty always wins in the end. How naive of me, right? But maybe, just maybe, I managed to prove I was right, even if it cost me my life. It all started in 1998, when I arrived in Millbrook, a small town in the heart of Texas, with just $1,500 in my pocket and a dream to build something honest. I had just married Elena, a Mexican-American nurse I met in San Antonio. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. "Frank," she used to say, "your hands weren't made to deceive anyone, they were made to fix things." I bought a small garage on Main Street, right across from what would eventually become my downfall. I put up a simple sign, Rodriguez Auto Repair. Honest service, fair price. Elena laughed when she saw it. "You're really going to put honest on your sign?" she asked. "Frank, people are going to be suspicious right away." But I insisted. I wanted everyone to know exactly what they'd find in my shop. The first years were tough, really tough. I'd come home with greasy hands and empty pockets. Elena worked double shifts at the hospital to support us, and even then she never once complained. "We're building something, mi amor," she would say, massaging my sore shoulders. "Something our daughter can be proud of." Sophia was born in 2004, bringing both the greatest joy and the greatest fear of my life. Elena developed complications during childbirth that the doctors couldn't resolve. I lost my wife 3 days after meeting my daughter. Suddenly, I was a single father with a barely surviving auto shop and a newborn who depended entirely on me. It was around that time that Stephen Kishigian arrived in town. Stephen was everything I wasn't. Tall, blonde, with that salesman's smile that won people over instantly. He bought the building right across from mine, a much bigger, more modern garage, and opened Kishigian's garage. Within weeks, I noticed he had a very different approach than mine. "Frank, you're too nice," Stephen told me one day while we were having coffee at Mary's Diner. "The secret to business is making the customer believe they need more services. Oil, filters, fluids. There's always something to replace." "I only replace what's actually broken," I replied. Stephen laughed. "And that's why you're still driving that 95 pickup while I just bought a brand new Silverado." He wasn't wrong. Financially, Stephen was light years ahead of me. His customers always left with much higher bills than mine. He always had the most expensive cars in his shop. He always had the most traffic. And me? Well, I had my honesty and my daughter Sophia, who got smarter every day. Sophia became my unofficial partner at the shop. Since she was 5, she'd stay there after school, doing homework in my makeshift office in the back of the garage. "Daddy, why does Mr. Stephen always have nicer cars at his garage?" she asked one day when she was 8. "Because he charges more, honey." "But why don't you charge more too?" I stopped working on the engine and knelt down to her level. "Sophia, there's a difference between making money and making money honestly. Your dad may not be rich, but when you grow up, I want you to be proud of how I earned every single penny." For years, I stuck to that philosophy. I never charged for unnecessary services. I never lied about a car's condition. I never jacked up prices just because the customer looked wealthy. My invoices were always detailed, explaining exactly what had been done and why. My customers knew they could trust me, and that gave me a satisfaction money could never buy. But as Sophia grew and our needs increased, private school, decent clothes, college plans, I started to wonder if my honesty was actually hurting my own daughter. Stephen kept offering me partnerships that could boost my income. "Frank, you've got a stellar reputation in town. People trust you. Imagine how much we could make if you just loosened your standards a bit." I always refused, but the doubt was there, gnawing away like rust on a car frame. In 2022, Sophia was getting ready for her senior year of high school. She'd been accepted to UT Austin, but the tuition was a distant dream for a small-town honest mechanic. That's when I started noticing something strange happening in town. Too many accidents, cars breaking down too frequently, and Stephen always seemed to be in the right place at the right time to fix the problems. I had no idea I was about to uncover Millbrook's biggest secret, a secret that would cost me my life, but also become my greatest victory. The first clue came in a way I never expected, through Lorraine Farron, a 67-year-old lady who drove a 2018 blue Honda Civic. Lorraine was one of those special customers, always on time for her checkups, always polite, always paid in exact cash. In September 2022, she brought the car in for a simple oil change. "Frank, something's not right with my car," she said, worried. "Last week, I went to visit my sister in Austin. On the way back, suddenly the brakes barely worked. Luckily, I was on a straight road and managed to stop slowly." I put the car on the lift to take a look. What I saw chilled me. The brake connections had been loosened, not from wear and tear, but clearly tampered with. Tool marks were still visible on the metal. "Lorraine, when was the last time you took this car to a shop?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, about 2 weeks ago, Steven said he needed to do a preventative inspection. Said it was free, just to make sure everything was okay for my trip." My stomach dropped. I tightened the connections and ran a full systems test. Everything worked perfectly. I didn't charge Lorraine and asked her to be very careful on the road. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in the office, browsing local newspapers online, looking for recent accident reports. What I found made me sick. In the past 2 years, Millbrook had seen a 300% increase in accidents caused by mechanical failure. In a town of only 4,000 people, that was statistically impossible, unless they weren't really accidents. Tommy Carver, 34, flipped his car on Highway 6 in March 2021. Brake failure, died on the scene. Jessica Martinez, 28, hit a tree in June 2021. Steering failed on a curve, left behind 2 young kids. Robert Nash, 45, pickup went off-road in December 2021. Brakes failed on a steep descent. Survived, but was left paralyzed. The list went on. 23 accidents in 2 years, 3 deaths, 8 serious injuries. And when I checked the town's records, I discovered something that made me break into a cold sweat. All of them, without exception, had visited Stephen's shop in the weeks before the accidents. I started investigating quietly. Over the next few weeks, whenever I saw a car leaving Keshagian's garage, I'd find an excuse to check it out. "Hey, Joe, how's your Chevy running? Saw you at Stephen's yesterday." People were happy to chat, especially when I offered a free second opinion. The pattern was always the same. Stephen would find small issues that needed fixing, charge fairly low prices, but intentionally leave something sabotaged. Loosened brakes, weakened steering rods, tampered fuel lines. Problems that wouldn't show up right away, but would cause catastrophic failures days or weeks later. The most diabolical part? Stephen also worked as a technical consultant for the local insurance company. When an accident occurred, he'd be called in to assess the damage and would always conclude it was a manufacturing defect or natural wear and tear. The insurer paid out, Stephen got his consulting fee, and often got the job to repair other damaged vehicles from the crash. It was a perfect scheme, and it was killing innocent people. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. I started documenting everything. I bought a small camera with my credit card. Sophia thought it was for making promotional videos for the shop, and began recording. The first useful footage I got was on a Thursday night. Stephen thought no one was around, but I was hidden in the alley between our buildings.
I saw him and two of his helpers, Danny Morrison and Kyle Brennan, working on Paul Carter's Honda after official hours. "Careful with that connection, Danny," I heard Stephen say. "Can't be too obvious. It has to last at least a week." "What if the guy dies?" Kyle asked, clearly nervous. Stephen shrugged. "Accidents happen, man, and we're not responsible for faulty factory parts, are we?" They laughed. Laughed about sabotaging a car. Laughed about the possibility of Paul Carter dying. I recorded everything. Over the following months, I gathered hours of footage. Stephen and his gang sabotaging at least a dozen cars. Conversations where they discussed which types of sabotage looked more convincing. Even one where Stephen bragged about how much money he was making off insurance. "Next year, I'm buying that house on the lakeshore," he said in a December recording. Who would have thought being an expert on manufacturing defects would pay so well? But I needed more than just recordings. I needed documents, physical evidence. That's when I started doing something that went against everything I'd ever believed in. I began breaking into Stephen's shop. Sophia was spending a few days at my sister's place in Houston, so I used the time to make my night visits to Kasijian's garage. The back lock was ridiculously easy to pick, ironic for someone who thought of himself as a professional criminal. In Stephen's office, I found exactly what I needed. Detailed spreadsheets of all the special services, a list of customer names, types of sabotage applied, and estimated dates for the failures. There were even notes on which accidents had been most profitable in terms of follow-up repair jobs. I photographed everything, every page, every document, every piece of evidence from the hell Stephen had unleashed on our town. But what shocked me most was a specific folder labeled Competition. Inside was a complete dossier on me. Photos of my shop, my house, Sophia, notes on my schedule, my clients, my finances, and at the end, a single sentence that froze my blood. "FR is starting to ask too many questions. Solution needed soon." Stephen knew I was investigating, and he was planning to do something about it. That night, I compiled all the evidence onto an old laptop I kept in the office. Videos, photos, documents, a full timeline showing the connection between Stephen's services and the subsequent accidents. It was all there, enough evidence to put Stephen behind bars for the rest of his life. The next morning, I called Sheriff Johnson to schedule a meeting. "Sheriff, I need to talk to you about something very serious. Can we meet on Friday?" "Sure, Frank. Everything okay?" "It will be, Sheriff. It will be." Friday, December 15th, 2023. That was the day I would hand over all the evidence and put an end to Stephen Kasijian's reign of terror. I had no idea Stephen had already decided I wouldn't make it there. On Thursday night, while I was closing the shop, I noticed my truck was making a strange noise when braking. As a mechanic, I immediately recognized the sound of worn brake pads. Strange, I'd replaced them just 2 months ago. But I was tired, eager for the meeting the next day, so I decided to check it Friday morning before heading out. That was the last mistake I made in life. That night, while I slept, Stephen and his goons broke into my shop, not to steal, just to make sure I never made it to that meeting with the sheriff. They sabotaged my truck in a far more subtle and deadly way than they did with other cars. They partially cut the brake line, enough to function normally in town, but to fail completely at high speeds. They loosened the lug nuts on the front right wheel, and as the final touch, they slightly misaligned the steering, so the truck would veer left straight into oncoming traffic if I tried to brake hard. It was a death sentence, disguised as a traffic accident. On Friday morning, I woke up excited. I was finally going to do the right thing. I was going to shut down Stephen's criminal operation and make sure no more families suffered like Jessica Martinez or Tommy Carver's had. I got into the truck, adjusted the rearview mirror, and headed out for my meeting with Justice. I had no idea I was driving my own coffin. Highway 6 was empty that December morning. It was going to be minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. Typical for a Texas winter, and most sensible people were home sipping hot coffee. I was driving my 1995 Ford pickup, the same one Stephen always mocked, toward Sheriff Johnson's office, with all the evidence that would forever destroy Stephen Kashigian's criminal empire. The laptop with all the proof was on the passenger seat, along with a letter I had written to Sophia the night before. A letter explaining everything in case something happened to me. It wasn't paranoia, it was precaution. After seeing the dossier Stephen had on me, I knew I was in real danger. I was about 15 miles from town when it started. First came a strange sound from the front right wheel, a rhythmic clack, clack, clack that grew louder the faster I went. I instinctively slowed down. When you've been a mechanic for 25 years, you recognize the sound of loose lug nuts. Then I noticed the steering wheel pulling to the left. Not much, but enough to require constant correction. Misalignment. Finally, as I reached the steep downhill stretch leading to the bridge over the Brazos River, I tried to brake to reduce my speed. Nothing. The brake pedal sank all the way to the floor without offering any resistance. The truck was doing 70 miles per hour and picking up speed. Ahead, on the bridge, I saw a cargo truck coming from the opposite direction. That's when I made my final decision as Frank Rodriguez. Instead of trying to swerve right, which would likely send me straight into the river, I turned the wheel left, straight into the guardrail. If I was going to die, I'd die trying to preserve the evidence that would take Stephen down. In the last seconds before the crash, I managed to do one final thing. I recorded a voice message on my phone. Sophia, Daddy loves you more than life itself. If you're hearing this, something's happened to me. Look for the laptop hidden behind the bookshelf in the office. Take everything to Sheriff Johnson. Stephen Kashigian killed me, just like he killed Tommy, Jessica, and all the others. You've always been my greatest victory, my daughter. Make sure justice wins. The crash happened at 75 miles per hour. The truck flipped 3 times before landing upside down in the brush off the side of the road. I died instantly. My neck broke on the first roll. But there was one thing Stephen didn't know about old Frank Rodriguez. I had learned a few lessons about prevention after all those years dealing with corrupt insurers and crooked mechanics. 2 weeks before I died, I had hidden a second copy of all the evidence in a safety deposit box at the First National Bank of Millbrook. Sophia was the sole authorized beneficiary. I had also mailed a registered letter to my attorney, Richard Hayes, in Austin, with specific instructions. If anything happened to me, he was to immediately turn over a third copy of the evidence to the FBI and the Texas State Attorney General's office. And the cherry on top? I had hacked into Kashigian's garage's security system, a ridiculously unprotected system, and installed remote cameras that uploaded everything to an online server. Even after my death, those cameras would keep recording Stephen's criminal activities. Stephen thought he had taken me out. In reality, he had just triggered my final trap. 3 days after my funeral, Sophia went to clean out my office at the shop. She found my final letter taped behind the bookshelf, exactly where I said it would be. Alongside the letter was the key to the safety deposit box and detailed instructions on how to access all the evidence. My dear Sophia, if you're reading this, it means the criminals that infested our town finally got to your father. But don't cry for me. Cry for the innocent victims Stephen Kashigian murdered. Then dry your tears and take this evidence to Sheriff Johnson. The truth always wins in the end, even when it costs everything we have. On the morning of December 28, 2023, Sophia walked into Sheriff Johnson's office carrying 3 laptops, 2 boxes of documents, and 57 hours of footage documenting the most shocking crimes in Millbrook's history. "Sheriff," she said with the steady voice she inherited from me, "my father was murdered, and here's the proof of who did it and why." When the sheriff saw the first recordings, Stephen and his gang sabotaging Lorraine Farron's car, he immediately called the FBI. Within 48 hours, Stephen, Danny, and Kyle Brennan were arrested on charges of multiple counts of murder, criminal conspiracy, insurance fraud, and attempted homicide. My final move had worked perfectly.
The trial of Stephen Kasagian became the biggest legal event in Millbrook's history. Reporters from Dallas, Houston, and even CNN came to cover the case of the killer mechanic who had murdered 3 people and attempted to kill dozens more in order to profit from auto repairs and insurance consulting. The evidence I had gathered was so abundant and detailed that Stephen's defense couldn't refute much of anything. The footage clearly showed him and his crew sabotaging cars. The documents from his office proved premeditation and systematic planning. And the most damning of all, the hidden cameras I'd installed had recorded Stephen celebrating my death the day after the crash. "Finally got rid of that nosy Frank," he said on camera, toasting with champagne. "Now I can expand the business without anyone asking inconvenient questions." Stephen Kasagian was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. Danny Morrison received 25 years. Kyle Brennan, who cooperated with the authorities and provided details of the entire scheme, was sentenced to 15 years. The victims' families sued the local insurance company, which ended up paying over $5 million in compensation. The company also faced a federal investigation that uncovered systemic corruption and complicity in Stephen's frauds. Sophia decided to keep Rodriguez Auto Repair running. At just 19, she became the youngest and most respected mechanic in all of Brazos County. Customers came from neighboring towns specifically to do business with Honest Frank's daughter. "Dad always said honesty was the best long-term business plan," Sophia told the Austin American-Statesman in an interview. "He was right. It might take longer to build an honest reputation, but once you do, it lasts forever." With the money she saved from the shop's growing profits and a scholarship she received thanks to the case's notoriety, Sophia enrolled at UT Austin to study mechanical engineering. Her plan is to graduate and return to Millbrook to expand the business she inherited from me. Stephen's shop was sealed by the FBI and later demolished by the city. On the site now stands a small memorial park dedicated to the victims of his crimes. A plaque in the center of the park reads, "In memory of Tommy Carver, Jessica Martinez, Robert Nash, and Frank Rodriguez, heroes who paid the ultimate price so the truth could prevail." Lorraine Farron, the first victim I managed to save, became one of Sophia's most loyal customers. "Your father saved my life," she always says, "and you're keeping his legacy alive." Today, 3 years after my death, Millbrook is a safe town once again. There hasn't been a single mechanical failure accident since Stephen was arrested. People drive their roads with confidence, knowing their local mechanics aren't trying to kill them. And every time Sophia closes up the shop at night and looks at the sign that reads Rodriguez Auto Repair, honest service, fair price, she knows her father was right all along. Honesty really does win in the end. It might cost you everything, but in the end, it always wins. My name was Frank Rodriguez. I lived honestly. I died fighting for the truth. And my greatest victory came after I was gone.